Welcome back to our channel, where real stories come alive and remind us that kindness can change lives in the most unexpected ways. If you're new here, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell, because the story you're about to hear will warm your heart and maybe even bring a tear to your eye. It all began on a freezing winter night in a quiet little town tucked away in the mountains. The storm had rolled in quicker than anyone had expected. Thick snow blanketed the roads, cutting off travel and leaving people stranded with little warning. Most residents had already stocked up and locked themselves indoors, waiting for the blizzard to pass. But fate had a different plan for one kind old lady named Margaret. Margaret was in her 70s, living alone in a modest wooden house at the edge of town. Her children had grown up and moved away, but her spirit remained young, and her heart was larger than life. That night, as the wind howled and snow piled up to the windows, she heard the deep rumble of engines outside, an unusual sound during such a storm. Curious, she peeked through her frosty curtains and saw a group of tough-looking men struggling to get their motorcycles through the snow. Their leather jackets bore a name that many in town would cross the street to avoid: the Hells Angels. Most people might have locked the door, turned off the lights, and pretended not to be home. But not Margaret. She saw something different. She didn't see intimidating bikers, she saw cold, tired men who needed shelter. Without a second thought, she opened her front door, stepped outside into the biting wind, and called out, "Come on in, boys. You'll freeze out here." The bikers looked stunned. Strangers rarely welcomed them, especially not a sweet grandmotherly figure like Margaret. One of the men shouted back, "Ma'am, we don't want to bother you." But Margaret just waved her hand and insisted, "Nonsense. No one's staying out in this storm. Now get in here before you catch your death." And so, one by one, 15 leather-clad bikers parked their struggling bikes near her porch and trudged inside, shaking snow from their jackets and boots. The tiny house was suddenly filled with towering men, tattoos, and the smell of gasoline mixed with melting snow. But Margaret wasn't fazed in the slightest. She ushered them toward the fireplace, handed out blankets, and put on a pot of hot soup. At first, the bikers sat awkwardly, unsure what to do. They weren't used to being welcomed with kindness, especially from someone so gentle. But Margaret treated them like long-lost grandchildren. She asked their names, fussed over their wet clothes, and even scolded them lightly for not wearing warmer gloves. As the night went on, laughter began to replace the silence. The men told her stories of their travels, and she listened with genuine curiosity, nodding and chuckling at the wild adventures they shared. In return, she told them about her late husband, her children, and her love for baking. By midnight, her small living room had become a safe haven, filled with warmth, laughter, and the smell of fresh bread rising in the oven. When morning finally came, the storm had passed. The men, rested and grateful, thanked Margaret for her hospitality. One of them said, "You didn't have to let us in. Most people wouldn't even look our way." Margaret just smiled and replied, "Well, everyone deserves kindness, especially in times like these. Don't ever forget that." The bikers promised they'd never forget her. They left that morning, firing up their engines and heading off down the snowy road. Margaret thought that was the end of the story. But she was wrong. The very next day, just as the sun rose over the town, Margaret heard a sound she would never forget. The deep thunder of motorcycles, not just a few, but dozens and dozens of them. She stepped onto her porch, shielding her eyes from the glare of the snow, and gasped. Lined up in front of her home, stretching down the street, were 100 motorcycles. The roar of engines filled the air as biker after biker dismounted and walked up to her house. They had come from miles around, brothers of the men she had sheltered, all of them wanting to meet the woman who had shown such simple, unconditional kindness. Margaret's porch was soon filled with men handing her flowers, groceries, and even firewood to keep her warm through the rest of the winter. One biker placed a leather jacket on her shoulders, custom-stitched with her name on it. Another handed her a patch, declaring her an honorary member of their brotherhood. Tears filled Margaret's eyes as she realized the impact her small act of compassion had made. From that day forward, Margaret was never alone again. Whenever she needed help, whether it was repairing her fence, shoveling her driveway, or simply keeping her company, there was always a line of motorcycles outside her home. The townsfolk, who once whispered about the rough bikers, couldn't help but smile when they saw the angels riding in just to check on her. Margaret had broken down a wall that many thought was unshakable. She had reminded everyone, even the toughest of men, that kindness has no boundaries and that sometimes, all it takes is a warm meal and an open door to change hearts forever. Her story spread across the country, inspiring people far beyond her little town. News stations came to interview her, but Margaret always gave the same humble answer: "I didn't do anything special. I just saw some cold boys who needed help. Anyone would have done the same." But deep down, everyone knew not everyone would have. It takes a special kind of heart to look past fear and stereotypes and see people for who they are. And Margaret's heart was pure enough to do just that. So the next time you find yourself in a position to help someone, remember this story. Kindness costs nothing, but its ripple effect can be greater than you'll ever know. Margaret gave shelter to 15 strangers, and in return, she gained 100 protectors, friends, and family. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to give this video a like and share it with someone who could use a reminder that kindness is powerful. And if you haven't already, subscribe to our channel for more heartwarming stories that prove there's still good in this world. Until next time, remember, one act of kindness can change everything.